Good evening and welcome to a late stream. So I want to talk about so much tonight, but also not much because I don't want to take too long. There's Iran, there's Ballymena, there's protests in Ireland against immigration. There are, Iran and Israel. A bit of a big deal. Lots of stuff. But I just kind of want to catch up on a few bits. I had technical difficulties there. Oh, I don't take well to that kind of stuff because I'm very bad with that stuff, and when it goes wrong, I have like a toddler nervous breakdown type of situation because I just don't like it. I don't enjoy it when things don't work, and there's no logical explanation. My headphones didn't. Here's what I'm using for earphones, and then the screen stopped working. Everything stopped working. So massive pain. So anyway, I was late already, and then I end up being extra late with this stuff. I'm actually just going to tweet out a link. Hello to the chat. Someone said, at least it's not the 1980s. That's another. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, so there's loads of discourse going on. I'm just tweeting out, or whatever it is. Fucking hell. This stream, just to see if anybody wants to join or watch. Telegram. Garrod. Live now. Oh, how does it even work? Live now. There we go. Yeah, there's the 1980s discourse. There's a good bit to talk about, and it's one of those things where I haven't had a chance to stream live now. Not love now. I've done that before. Autocorrect. Live now. No. NOW. But I don't think I streamed last weekend. Basically, I had like a bit of a bug I picked up from my kids or whatever, like a cold flu type of thing. But of course, in that space of this last 2 weeks, so much has happened. I could have done several bits. There's the demonstration in Cork. There was a lot to do with that. You know what I'm going to be talking about with that, if I was going to talk about it, which is, of course, Jewish. There was a lot to do with that. You know what I'm going to be talking about. But yeah, never mind that. That's a strange experience. Like the Jewish Zionist influence creeping into Irish right-wing nationalist populism. I can't even. It's too late to delve into that. I might talk about it a bit. Keep it kind of casual. See what pops up, and there's also this recent. Today's activity is the discussion about the 1980s versus now. I had a fascinating thing on Twitter. I like to think I started an Irish Twitter discourse. I said that the current era is definitely worse than the 1980s, and it sparked all sorts of rebellion from boomers and different types of people. And there was so much going back and forth on it from critics. And then I started breaking down the different types of critics. I just think it's time. I think it's time to declare it, basically. I see someone in the chat says the 90s were the best. Yeah, some people said you should have picked the 90s or 1995 to 2005 as the golden era to use as your benchmark. And my whole purpose was to actually not do that, was to pick the 1980s and sort of attack their most fortified position instead of picking, because it's easy to pick 1999 and say, oh, well, that was the heyday. And it's true. But their most fortified position is not the 70s or the 2000s or the 90s. It's the 1980s. That was the worst thing ever. And thus, we compare the grinding present always to the 80s. Well, the 80s was worse. The 80s had high unemployment. The 80s had a heroin epidemic in Dublin. You had the troubles in the north, etc. And so I like to compare it to that and just say, I can see my replies popping up in front of me here. This distracted me, my Twitter timeline. But it's, I mean, there's a ton could be said on it, but I just, in short, and there's so many counter arguments. One of them is you weren't there. Like, you weren't there, man. I was born in 1991, so yeah, I wasn't there. But it's kind of like, can we use rational brains as well? You know, none of us were there in World War II. These critics weren't there in World War II, but they'd be, you know, they weren't on the battlefield. They weren't at the Alta conference chatting to Stalin and the lads, but they used their judgment. I have parents who were like, I hadn't been born yet, but like were married and getting to having kids throughout the 80s. I hear all about the stories of my mother and father in the 1980s and all the rest of it. You know, it's not ancient history. The other thing you can do is look up statistics and facts, and that speaks for itself. What I will say though is that I feel fairly confident that through this discourse in the last few days, I think it's settled science that the current day in Ireland is worse than the 1980s. I'd love to have someone on to debate it. It's the kind of thing you could have a debate in Trinity on easily, somewhere like an esteemed venue, where you have a panel of 3 versus 3 moderated. You have several hundred people there. You live stream it out, and it becomes like a cultural event, because that discussion would bring into it the boomer question versus like the younger people now. The whole boomer Q, the BQ. It brings in the question of GDP worship versus some other view of national success, which is, of course, a huge salient discussion to be had, especially as regards Ireland, about the West in general, but Ireland with its FDI, its massive GDP, the fact that it's known the world over that those metrics actually contradict the lived reality on the ground. The pension bomb versus immigration, the whole population replacement theory, all that stuff comes into it. The question of national identity, of social fabric, of the fertility kind of crisis, if they call it that, religiosity, all this. The question of Ireland's Holocaust, so to speak, Ireland's dark history of oppression and mother and baby homes and theocracy running rampant in 1989, etc. These questions all fold themselves into the other question of is Ireland better or worse now than the alleged worst time in living memory, which is the 1980s? It's sort of like one of these unexamined dogmas that we're meant to all just believe in. And of course, the 80s had problems. My thesis is not that the 80s had no problems. It had plenty of problems. Every time has its own problems of the day. My point is simply to say that the problems of current day Ireland are unambiguously worse, you know. And it's a fascinating one. I went back and forth with people. I broke down the logic of it, the main arguments of my critics. I think I'm fairly representing them. And none of them really hold up. What I'm doing in reply to them is to say that, because you could introduce a million data points or anecdotal references or whatever, right? My sort of counter argument to most of it, just to keep it simple, is simply some of the stats from now. So one of them is that home ownership among 25 to 39-year-olds in Ireland is currently 7%, right? Nobody can get a house, basically. And it's not that they can't get a house because they're renting a luxurious apartment. We switched from ownership to rent. You know, people are having great lives renting away because rents are almost totally unavailable. The average rent is like $2,000 or something in the country. People are terrified of their previous leases getting pulled out from them, the landlord pulling the rug, because they could go from being a middle-class person who's sort of treading water grand to being sort of homeless overnight. So anyway, 7% home ownership now. And I grokked, and I also Google Gemini. I used AI, which some people have a problem with. and asked it basically to estimate the percentage of the same age demographic who were homeowners in, let's say, 1985. And both of them, Grok and Gemini, said somewhere between like 70 or 80%, thereabouts. Let's say 75%. So you have 70+% down to 7%. So a 10 times decline on that. And as regards Grok and Gemini, the reason I use that, it'd be much nicer to get a CSO stat or whatever, but it just doesn't exist. So if you were to do it manually, you would basically go on a, I don't know, like a 7-hour arduous, tedious journey on Google, scraping together anecdotal reports from newspaper articles throughout the 80s and 90s, the odd study that was done, trying to sort of pull a few different facts against each other, and you would never actually get an answer because the data is a bit too thin on the ground. Like to get an official stat from the CSO to say, here's how many in 1985, it just doesn't exist. So you have to compare from maybe some data that came up a few years later and extrapolate backwards and use another bit of data and extrapolate forwards and all of that. And you would do that manually and you would come out with an answer that is not written in stone, but it's a reasonable guesstimation based on what is known. And effectively, that's what the likes of Grok or ChatGPT or whatever is doing quickly. And both of them arrive separate, whatever they are, AIs, end up with a fairly similar answer. And also, anecdotally, there's no one disputes that probably most people, if you split the difference between 25 and 39, you get like 33 or something, somewhere there. So most people who were around in the 80s would probably agree that, yeah, most 33-year-olds probably did own their gaff at that point, on a mortgage or otherwise. So anyway, point being, it's a 10 times decline. And then I looked at hospital beds in the 1980s up until now, and the amount of hospital beds available per capita has declined massively. And someone could say, well, that doesn't matter because we've higher tech now and we don't need beds or something like that. But then you look at reports of the last few years and they say waiting lists for hospitals are the highest ever. So I think you can put two of those facts together and just say, look, clearly, whatever direction the country is heading in, the systemic factors, immigration, this, that, the other, have led to a situation where you have less beds per capita. So it's not that there's necessarily less beds, just the population in it has increased several million. You have less beds per capita, and lo and behold, you have a big long wait list and nobody can get into a hospital. You have 2 out of 3 GP practices in rural Ireland are not taking new patients. You had that one GP from Wicklow said that it was a new GP practice, and after a few weeks or something like that, he had to stop taking new patients. He said that 75% of his patients were, this was in like the Irish Independent, 75% of his new patients, or the patients that he had taken in since he started the practice, were foreign, and that it created a huge burden because there had to be translators and all sorts of stuff like that. And of course, a lot of them are on medical cards and they're in, multiple times a month or whatever for this or that. So he had to stop taking new patients. So imagine you're living in Wicklow and you go, geez, we could really do with a new GP. New GP comes along, he's subscribed to it, 75% foreigners. Not only is the number high, but the burden that they place on the GPs is higher as well. And so in effect, you got a new GP, but you ended up with almost less GP per capita than you almost did previously. Like there's more pressure has been put on your area than anything that was relieved, and it wasn't you that benefited from it. So in short, we've gone from a situation where in my living memory in the late 90s, even up until 10 years ago, and it certainly would have been true in the 80s, that you pick up a phone, you ring your GP, you either get an appointment that day or maybe the next day, depending on what the issue is, that you have the urgency of your issue. But like it would be that day or the next day, unheard of for them to say, we'll book you in a week. And what we have now is 2-week waits, not for every GP practice, but commonly enough, there are 2-week waits for GPs. I'm getting caught up between GDP and GPs. Someone here in the chat says GPs did house visits in the 80s. Yeah, so I mean, I don't remember that, but I'd take your word for it. But certainly, if you told someone in the 80s, for all the unemployment and for all the other problems that there were, if you said, what if you rang your GP and they told you to come in 2 weeks, and you ring and you've like a chest infection, you've this, you've that, like generally speaking, by the time you ring a GP, not to go over the basics here, but like, at least in my experience, and I'm sure it's true for almost everybody, you don't call a GP at the first tickle of a problem, right? You generally go, well, I don't want to spend €60. I don't want to bother ringing. I don't want to go in and sit down and wait. And I just don't enjoy the experience. I don't want to do it. And I also don't want to end up being given an antibiotic or something prematurely that I don't need. So I'm going to kind of wait it out, stick it out for a while and see how I go. And then if it's really not going, and if it's really, take like some sort of sinus, chest infection, something standard, I'm going to wait until it's really on top of me before I fold and I go to the GP and inevitably get antibiotics or whatever. So by the time you're calling them, you've probably like given it a while, and it's by the time you're calling them, you need to see them. You need to see them pronto, and then you get a week or two appointment. It just doesn't work. I've had experiences where I call the GP, they don't answer. I called 3, 4 more times, and then they say, yeah, you can come in next week. And I just think that's not going to work for me. So then I have to call a Pakistani on a phone on like some sort of GP online doc, pay them like €50. They call you back like half an hour later and they say, what's up? And they don't even take your medical history. And you just say, yeah, I need like augmentin duo and like a steroid or whatever. Like, if, let's say it's a chest infection, something standard. I've had that before. I pretty much know what it is. I need those. And he goes, sure, I'll send it on to your pharmacy. You go down to your pharmacy and you get it. Now, think of the rent seeking that you've been forced into there. Your man performed no analysis on you. He didn't see you. He didn't take any medical history, really. And you told him what you had wrong with you and what you needed. Why can't I just go to the pharmacy and just tell them that straight up, if that's the case? Now, the same medical establishment would then say, well, you shouldn't do that, because if, say, you have a chest infection, it might be your third one in a few years. Maybe that was actually a more chronic issue, something more serious, and a stethoscope to your chest, or if the doctor, because it's a different Pakistani every time, they don't know. But if it was your own GP, they would actually recognize patterns and maybe spot something, and it'd be much better, much more appropriate. And you go, yeah, that would be, but I can't see them. I can't see them for a week. And by the time you're calling them to go, you've already declined and your breathing, let's say, has gotten bad enough that you need to go in and get it sorted. So you're in that position where you go, in effect, in theory, we do have GPs. They are available, hypothetically, but in reality, you might as well be in the Congo rainforest, because you don't really have one. You don't really have one that you can actually access. So you've gone from the 1980s, where you had a GP, as someone here says, maybe visiting your house, but certainly you get to see them that day, the next day, and they know you very well, and the secretary has lots of time. They take your details and they get to know you, and you have a breezy appointment. You've gone from that to basically not having a GP, in a sense. So it's like, tell me how the country's gotten better or worse. If you've gone from having a doctor to not having a doctor, if you've gone from being able to go to a hospital, I don't know exactly what it was like in the 80s, but I gather that if you had like a legitimate enough issue, you needed to see a consultant, get scans, this and that, the whole thing could be wrapped up in, a couple of months, a few weeks, a few months, whatever. Now in Ireland, it's well known that you could end up years, right, with fairly, serious issues, bar cancer or something like that. You could just be languishing in pain, in distress, misery, whatever, for years before getting seen. So in effect, you don't have a hospital. I mean, it's not really there for you. So again, you go back to the 80s, it had problems. We have problems today. But if you take some big pillar items and you say, you effectively don't have healthcare, like between GPs and hospitals, and you effectively don't have housing. Of course, we're talking about under 40s, right? But that matters. The reproductive demographic of your society, if that should be the fulcrum of any society, and if that's not firing, you have a big problem. You definitely don't have a future. So if for that, specifically for under 40s, you don't have housing. And then for pretty much everyone, you don't have healthcare. Then it's hard to see how any other factor, unemployment was high. You didn't have as many, I don't know, takeaway restaurants, different varieties, Cambodian food or whatever. It's hard to see how anything um, competes with that. There's so many caveats as well. Like I'm straying from like my thumbnail and title of this video, but I mean whatever. It's hard to see, or sorry, just to caveat as well on the technology aspect. You know, someone would say, well, we have better tech in medicine now, so you can get diagnosis. I don't know, it's different types of tech, surely in healthcare now that weren't there in the 1980s. But of course, the caveats to these things are obvious. The same goes for iPhones and the internet. You don't have mobile phones in the 80s, really. But that's just technology. My whole spiel on that is that infant mortality, the prevalence of the large motorway, life expectancy in general, access to mobile phones and internet, all of these things unfurled in places as diverse as Eritrea, described by the UN as a regime of terror, right? Dictatorship, cult of personality in Africa. Myanmar, a sort of Buddhist military nationalist junta. Iran, a revolutionary Islamic theocracy, cut off from the world by global sanctions, cut off from globalization. And China, a nominally communist, closer to fascist, authoritarian ethno-state, described by the Pentagon as a racist superpower. So you've all of these different places, and if you look at their metrics, their infant mortality in the last 50 years or whatever, just rapidly declining. It's very similar to Ireland. Life expectancy increasing by about 10 years in the last 40 years. The prevalence of mobile phones, internet, motorways. Motorways started with the Autobahn and the interstate in America, obviously in accordance with the car. So the road technology kind of changed, shifted, and you know, different types of hydraulic diggers and other things. Like a confluence of technological factors came together to make the motorway viable, necessary, and efficient to both build and to use. And so you saw it in Germany and America first, and then it kind of rolled out across the world to varying extent. And in Ireland, lo and behold, a few decades on delay, motorways started popping up, one, then another, and another. No big deal. So these technological improvements are kind of bullshit. You can't take the 1980s to now and say, well, we've mobile phones now and we didn't then, so it must be better now. You're looking at objective stats that aren't affected by like just general technological development. You're looking at stuff like home ownership. You're looking at ability to access healthcare, leisure time, this, that, the other. The amount of friends people have, the amount of social time people have, blah, blah, blah. You know, things like that, things that wouldn't strictly be affected by just general technological advancement. That's how you read it. And the way I look at it is that if I went to Gambia, right, and I had never been there before, knew nothing about the place, but I landed off the plane and someone said, listen, you have to rate this place. We've got a raging question going on in the country. Is it better now, or is it better? Was it better in the 1980s? Or which one had worse problems overall? And I said, I've never been here before. I have no idea about the place. So let's just start with the basics. You know, in order of sort of preference or importance, I would start with something like food. So not necessarily, and yes, the diversity of food would be something, but just generally the ability of people to kind of feed themselves. Now, everyone in the 80s, the boomers, love to tell me that, oh, my parents used to have my brother eat his dinner, and then when he went to bed, they would eat the scraps off his plate to save money. And I looked it up, and it turns out in 2024, a report from Bernardo's came out that 4 in 10 Irish parents skip or reduce their portions of meals so that they can give it to their kids. The amount of houses now that people are using super sirs, they're now wearing these suits people are wearing, like heated, basically like an electric blanket, but it's like a onesie or a suit type of thing, right? They wear that so that they don't have to turn on the heat. And all of that stuff. Things like coldness in houses and inability to pay for heating and stuff like that. I don't think the boomers who are doing well now realize. So when they like to get nostalgic about, oh, we had it so hard, you wouldn't believe, ice on the windows and eating the kids' dinner when they had gone. It's like, okay, yeah, that's not great or whatever, but it's actually happening now. It's just not happening to you because you're 65. But for parents in Ireland now, this kind of stuff is happening. So food, let's say you could call it even or thereabouts. I mean, supermarkets have a bit more variety. You have more takeaways, but the prices are going up rapidly. Everyone knows at the moment food prices are off the wall. And people, you see it on TikTok and stuff, people talking about how they're starting to almost panic, They're looking at their food bill, they're going in for just a small few bits and it's €50. They get a real shop, big shop, and it's like hundreds, And so, yeah, someone says in the 1980s, no parents ate the scraps off the plates. I'm just taking this person's narrative because they like to exaggerate, right? But you know what I mean. You could also argue that maybe there was more wholesome food, maybe some more local and kind of like organic without having to be organic food. And it's one of those things that probably neither here nor there. They had food then. Some people struggled a bit with it. We have food now. Some people struggle with it. Let's call that a draw, right? Someone says in 1992, a tin of beans was 2p in Tesco's. I don't know what to believe, but the idea that they were all eating gruel in the 80s and they hadn't heard of a Chinese takeaway or making some Italian food at home or whatever, it's just bonkers, right? So that's food. Let's call food a draw. And then we have say I'm in Gambia, I go, the next thing's just like, as a complete outsider here, just looking at like in life what is important, I'd go housing. What's the story with that? Do you have gaffs? Or shelter is what they call it in third world context. Shelter, housing, like what's the story? Do you have somewhere to live? Do you have a mansion? Do you have a hut? What's going on? Do you have anywhere? Are you homeless? What's the story there? Like what happens? And also what happened 40 years ago? What happened in the 80s? Was this? Let's compare and contrast. Now, in that question, it's a no-brainer in Ireland, right? If 70% of people owned a house in the 80s, between 25 and 39 years old, and 7% do now, and they live in their mammy's bedrooms when they're 35 or whatever, then that's just a no-brainer, right? And then healthcare, again, barring for technological advancements and maybe certain MRIs and CT, I don't know, that stuff doesn't really count because, of course, every 20, 30 years you go from electrification to radio to television to computer to AI. Phones get better every few years, stuff like that. I had one person on Twitter telling me that braking technology in cars and crumple zones in cars have gotten better since the 80s, so it's better now. Stuff like that is just ridiculous. But in terms of for the health technology of the day, in terms of your ability to just actually access it, then it's hands down the 80s was better, right? Clearly than now. It's basically non-functional now for a lot of people. So again, in terms of food, housing, healthcare, it pretty much all on a whole goes to it's worse now. So I don't know, if I heard that in Gambia and someone said, yeah, but there were other things in the 80s that were worse, I'd be like, well, they'd want to be some fairly big things. Like, I mean, it's going to be hard if housing and healthcare are like a million times worse now, then it's going to be hard to beat, to be honest. Like it just is, and I just can't get it through to these people. I just realize these boomers, technocrats, these people, even younger people who are indoctrinated on like Song for a Raggy Boy and, Ireland was like this dreadful theocracy, which is just mental illness, basically. And like everyone was, marital rape was rampant, and everybody was saying beating your wife is the best thing ever. No bother. Like, how much do you beat your wife? Oh, you're competing, and everyone being grand about this, that, and the other. Bishops running around with like cat o' nine tails, whipping people. You know, the idea that people can believe a time that's so recent in the past, which lots of people walking around on the street were in their prime during. So it's not, we're not talking like Babylonian history here. We're not talking like ancient Greece. We're just talking a few decades ago, like the same people who are walking around on the street currently, that it was such an alien, like Roald Dahl tier, the aunties from James and the Giant Peach, like an evil black and white grey dungeon-esque hellscape. It's just mad. It's like, so you think the same people, their human nature was so fundamentally different that everyone was going around beating and oppressing and hating women, right? Women being like your mother, your sister, your wife, your daughter. Like, you just go around going, oh God, I hate them so much. I can't wait to oppress them and hurt them. And like, it's just nuts, right? But they believe it. They believe it. And they take a couple of scandals, let's say situations of like institutional abuse or whatever, and they typify and characterize the whole society of the time by those Holocaust-esque stories that are like blown up, exaggerated, put in bright lights. But you would never do that in Ireland for the like state-sponsored human trafficking through the asylum system and just open migration and everything in general. The amount of sex and labor trafficking and drug trafficking and all, like the amount of filthy, abusive crime. You go onto like a mushroom farm in the middle of Cavan or something like that. You go in there and you will see huddled. They look like, I don't know, Guatemalans or Bangladesh. I don't know where they're from, but they're clearly slaves. They clearly are maybe sleeping in shipping containers, and some Gombeen arrives in his Land Rover and there's some deals going on and filthy stuff like that. Same goes on in the trawlers on the West Coast. There's stories about that. Some of it gets out in public, some of it doesn't. But unbelievable abuse, and it's largely migrant-based abuse of people, treating them as farm animals, basically, to be used, and a lot of it is absolutely filthy. The Macroom Asylum Centre was known, and I don't know if it's still going, but it was known as Park and Ride, right? So the idea was like that the black or whatever, the various different foreigner guests of the asylum centre, so-called, would be in the game. They'd be in prostitution, and so you'd have like filthy bios and vans driving down, you know, and of course those women are working maybe under like an Albanian pimp who is connected with some Gombeen locally who's getting a cut of the action as well. Maybe a guard is too. All this kind of stuff is patently, obviously. Go to Parnell Street, Talbot Street in Dublin. It's like Travis Bickle territory. I'm not like violent, but I'm saying you feel the alienation of Travis Bickle, right? It's screaming out from the walls and the streets around you, the amount of filthy, abusive corruption that is going on, and probably sex trafficking of minors and all sorts of stuff. Like, it really is just almost like totally obvious. And of course, the whole country, the whole institution. Look at your man. What's his name, if you can remind me? The councillor, Anthony Flynn, right? I'll say no more. If you're familiar with that, he was like a working class councillor for progressive councillor in Dublin, and he, you know, he so-called supposedly killed himself, but then he was involved in some situations as well before that. You know what I'm saying? Like, you could take that, and I would argue that would typify our society currently. But like, the same progressive wouldn't say, who's defending the current era, as, oh, we've Vietnamese restaurants and we're all gay or whatever. They wouldn't. They wouldn't say, well, there's abuse going on here and there, and that's the whole story. Let's make a Hollywood movie of Ireland today. It just doesn't. It's so reductive to just take these fringe cases or whatever and say that's what it was like. You know, it's not like that. Like, all this sex trafficking and drug trafficking and abuse and stuff I'm talking about now, for the average family who are having their dinner in Galway, right, the suburbs of Galway, and going to school, and but it doesn't affect them. They know very little of it. They just do their own thing. That's the case for like 99% of people. It is not reflective at all, you know, and it's something that's happening. It's the filthy underbelly of society or whatever. And it would be the same for some of their arguments about clerical abuse or this, that, and the other. They say, oh, they would just move the priests around when they were caught in a scandal. And I'm not like defending any of that happens. I would have been there fighting against it, I'd like to think, at the time. And probably getting ostracized for it too. But, you know, they move a priest around. Well, it's the same with these asylum centers. They move people around, and something happened with a teenage girl, and, you know, keep it a hush. Hopefully the racists don't hear about it, and we'll keep it hush and move someone on, and, you know, give them a slap on the wrist from the guards, and then they'll get put in another center on the other side of the country. But yeah, so all the arguments fall flat, basically. Mobile phones, we have them now, but we didn't then. Bullshit. It was a stultifying theocracy. Bullshit. Oh, my uncle's dog's roommate's cousin had to eat scraps off a dinner plate because he didn't have enough money for the food shopping. Well, that's a lot of people now, actually, as well. You know, you name it. A lot of these arguments are just empty. And you have to go, if someone could say, well, what is a legitimate argument? What is a legitimate metric? I would say things like home ownership, your ability to access healthcare, the unemployment thing of the 80s. Oh, people were unemployed and they had to emigrate. A lot of them went over to Liverpool and London, did a bit of work for a few years. My own father did that and came back. A lot of them just came back, and they were actually over in England, most of them. And also, I don't need to defend it. That was one of the legitimate problems of that time, sure. But the problem is now we have so-called full employment, which is also a kind of skewed stat. At the moment, you've lots of permanently out of work. The counting is kind of dodgy. But insofar as we do have full employment, well, a lot of that employment is migrants who tend to a room and doing Deliveroo or whatever. And the only reason they can afford to live is because they're living that way. You have people working in Starbucks or whatever job in precarious work as well, who could never even begin to afford a home, to buy, to even rent, to get a car, to do anything. It's slave money, right? Basically, the wages to the purchasing power for these wages, for these jobs, bullshit. You might as well not have them. As I've argued before, you would be better off just on the dole, right? On the scratcher, on the rock and roll, as they say. You'd just be better off, because it's actually way better to have a medical card, a council house, additional lease payments, and all the rest of it than be on some minimum wage job. A minimum wage job is basically completely unviable for any adult. And you could say, even not just minimum wage, a bit higher than that. So these jobs are, it doesn't, you know, it's like you would have been better off. You would have been better off working a part-time job in the 80s. You would have gotten more for it than you would for like a full-time job now, you know, in the way that you had a single income household, a dad who worked a fairly ordinary job could keep a house with 2 or 3 kids and a wife and have a, you know, modest but sustainable life. Maybe I'm going on about this too much. Should I be talking about Iran and Israel or Ballymena? I don't know. But there's just so much on this. And I know I've talked about it before, but it's such an important question and nobody really talks about it, because you have these like left-wingers sort of who are like, oh, we need to be nice to everybody, and like I think like landlords are greedy, and like I think like we can take in the whole world, like you know, like it's just unlistenable. And then you have the right who are like era, too many immigrants. You know, it's like, okay, yeah, no, I know there's too many immigrants, but like, so it's very hard to get you get it on X, you get some excellent minds there, but like in terms of people more speaking about it, it's sort of lost. So maybe it is valuable for me to go on with this, but you know, there's so many other indicators, like, yeah, and people bring up these UN or whatever it is, quality of life indexes, where they say, oh, look, this metric here says everything is better now, you know, and you go, okay, well, I need to know what's in it, and more importantly, what is not in that metric. Happiness, quality of life, standard of living. they are all a bit dodgy. Here's one example, right, where say you have an issue in your house, right? So you're fortunate enough to have a house. You're a person, you're like my age, right? I'll just take it from my own experience. This is something that bothers me. I'm just speaking to a lived experience here. But you're fortunate enough to have a house. You're not mad poor, you're not mad rich. You're doing your thing. You have a few kids, whatever, right? And you have a leak or an issue with your shower, your toilet, your sink, whatever. What do you need? A plumber, right? Clearly. Now you have to, I don't want to use crass language, but it's like you almost have to do, like, it's almost not a question of just paying a plumber. Okay, the job costs 150 euro or whatever. It's like you have to like go around and petition them, get on your hands and knees, beg, borrow, steal, just to get them to like come over, entertain it, whatever. It's very, very hard to get anyone over. And when they do come over, of course, they can, if they want to, they can say, oh, it's going to be 600 euro, for something that really is a couple hours work and a few parts. There's obviously a shortage of them, clearly. Even though we're bringing in all these migrants and work visas, and that was meant to be the whole gig, right? Whereas in the 80s, I wasn't there, but I'm pretty sure if you had an issue, there'd be a lot of people locally, a lot of fellas, bios locally, who could do it. They're either licensed, they're not, they have experience, but you could get a plumber over to bag of tools, under the sink, job done. In today's money, they probably say 50 euro, no big deal. Happy days. You could probably, from the moment you spot the problem, you want to fix it, to having it done, could be 24 hours, right? And no big deal. Whereas now it's just this nightmare. I don't know, is that factored into quality of life? I don't think they do. I really don't. But stuff like that can be very, it might sound trivial, but it's actually not, because like if you need something fixed, it can be quite distressing is too strong a word, but things like that, things like not being able to get a GP, having to call some Indian who is not actually examining you, and you're just giving them money for literally no discernible reason, and calling your GP practice, not getting an answer, getting told by the hospital, oh yeah, no, we understand you have a problem, we see that, all right, but we'll put you on the list, and probably 2 years we'll ring you, right? And then when you see the consultant in 2 years, he'll say, sure, I'm going to order a scan for you, come back in 6 months. That, not being able to get through that, not really being able to get a plumber, this, that, and the other, all these different alienation and dislocation, people moving an hour from where they grew up to live, right? That's very common. They're from Glasnevin, but now they're living in somewhere in Westmeath or whatever, right? That's very common. Are these things factored into the metrics? I don't think so. You have to actually look at these things holistically. But anyway, suffice it to say, I could go on all day. I think it's easily defensible that the worst neoliberal, or whatever it's called, Ireland, globalized modern Ireland, TM, loves to paint the 80s as the big boogeyman. And aren't we so lucky now that we have these problems of affluence that no one can afford a house? How lucky are we? Etc. And yet, I think if you actually examine the assumption, it's quite clear that no, it's way worse now. Some people, the problem is, right, is that some people are doing better. This is the other one, is that people say, Ireland is doing great overall, dripping in money, it's so good, employment, all this stuff. There's opportunities there if you want it or whatever. And yet, they say housing is a bit of, they'll go, yeah, housing, definitely a problem, definitely a speed bump, definitely a wrinkle. We need to iron that out ASAP. We need to tweak the policies and iron it out, etc. Same with healthcare. Yeah, no, it's the HSE needs to be streamlined or something. Like it's a trivial, small problem that we can just fix. It's like, no. If healthcare and housing are a disaster, it's not that you have a great country and there's a few problems. It's that those things, along with other problems, make for a shitty, terrible country, and you have some positive aspects on the margins. That's what it really is. You have some people, a certain amount are doing very well. if you take the overall population, a lot of people are doing well, including boomers. If you aggregate it to under 40s, among that population, it's probably a small minority of people who are doing well, where they'd say, do you know what, it's going great for me, right? But the vast majority of people under 40 who are the fulcrum of your society, it's not going very well for them, evidently. And also, there is no sign of anything changing. At least in the 80s, I think there probably was a sense of, well, we've gone into a dip, we'll come out of it. Structurally, the country is kind of grand, you know. Whereas now there's a feeling among people that no, structurally the country is just deep into this. Like this is not some up and down type of thing. The fundamentals are completely wrecked in the country, right? So like people, your average 36-year-old who's still living at his parents is trying to save up, but the house prices keep going up and up more. So do the interest rates. So do the groceries, the electric, everything. And they keep pumping the country full of people. They're looking at a situation where they go, well, no, it's not like it's just going to turn a corner now. Like I'm looking at getting to being 50 or 60 or whatever, and still trying to rent, or, you know, like there is no one seriously believes that everything is fundamentally going to change. Like it's a passing cycle of macroeconomics that comes and goes over 6 or 7 years. Nobody believes that. So it's structurally way, way worse. And so this picture that they paint, the technocrats love to say, it's going great and it's got a couple of problems. It's not. It's going terribly. And in some select circles and in some select ways, there are some positives. That's what it really is. But it's big. And what I find is the same. I'm a broken record with this stuff, but the boomers are a huge segment there, because I put out a thing like this. So someone could say you're intergenerationally at war, right? You're always criticizing them. But I put out a thing and I just say, listen, I think it's necessary to say it at this point that now is worse than the 80s. It's rhetorically important for us to actually cross that bridge. And I'm not just saying it because I'm on team Man United versus Liverpool. I'm not saying it because I'm a certain age and I'm living in this era and I have a problem with boomers. I'm just saying objectively, no one's to blame. No, I'm not pointing fingers. I'm just saying now is worse than then. And here's evidence. Do you know what I mean? Here is evidence. Here are arguments for why that's the case. And if we can acknowledge that, then we can try to address it. You know, it's important to first accept you have a problem, you know, that kind of way. So I think it's important we go through this little exercise. And what do I get? I get the people who think, like the blue-haired feminists who think Ireland was like a anti-woman theocracy in the 80s. I get the technocrats or whatever, but the other huge constituency I get are boomers who come flooding in saying, I had to use a hot water bottle and for heat because it was cold in winter one time, and you've no idea, sonny boy, you're all soft now, and all this kind of stuff. And it's going, whoa. All I'm saying is that 7% of people aged 25 to 39 have a gaff. If there's no gaff, there's no children. If there's no children, there's no future, there's no country. We're gone, right? This is catastrophic. So that's all I'm trying to say. So I'm not on team me or a team anti-boomer. I'm just saying that's the fact, right? And that is objectively much worse than the 80s. You can talk about, oh, I was on the dole there for a few years, I couldn't get anything, and only the people in public sector had a thing. And then if you go, I know, I'm not trying to get combative with you here, but I'm just saying, like, you, regardless of those things you're outlining, you did have houses, like some way or another, you did all get gaffs. And you know, you could get plumbers and you could see the doctor and you could do this and that. So it's no shame for you to say, you know what, we had problems, but it was better then. It's actually much worse now, and we have like a major, major problem. You're not losing to admit that. You're not admitting guilt, or you're not losing victim brownie points or whatever. It's okay to say that. Like, they won't do it. They will not do it. They will actually, the moment you try to proffer that to them, they say unsolicited, they'll get into a fight with you. And then you go, okay, these boomers are out of hand, right? Generally speaking. And they'll say, oh, back with the intergenerational stuff. Now you're attacking us, we this, we that. You people are lazy. You people are this. You people are that. And you go, who's being the tribal generation here? It is a bit of a case of, oy vey, stop attacking me. It is a case. It is a bit like that. They're tribed up. They strongly identify as a group. They have an antipathy towards our generation, disregard. And the moment you point it out, they go, "Oh, like cry out as they strike you." It is very much like that. And whereas I'm going, I don't see the need for the divide. I wish we were all on the same team here. Like if old people were getting kicked out of their gaffs and they were freezing on the street and they were sleeping on their son's couch and couldn't get access to healthcare and their private insurance was getting revoked, I'd say, hey, leave the old people alone, right? We got to fight for them. You would just be happy to stand up for them and admit that it's bad or whatever. But I just don't see that happening with them. Most of them will shrug their shoulders, and they, like the technocrats and the feminists or whatever, will start painting the 80s as the bleakest time ever, and we went through the worst thing ever, and what you're seeing now is nothing, sonny boy, and all this. And it's just toxic. It's like that has to be addressed. That factor has to be addressed. They will invent stuff. They'll go, oh well. They'll often say like we had this and we had that, and someone else will come in and just go, that's bullshit. I was there too. That's not true, right? You're sort of making that up. And the interest rates being high, yeah, they came down after a couple of years. The fact is, it's like, look, you could say the interest rates were high, but 70% of you got gaffs and 7% of us got gaffs. So whether your interest rates were higher or your unemployment, either way, the way it panned out, the proof of the pudding is sort of in the eating. So it's just like, just admit it that it is much worse now and we need to fix it. And there's a generation that is basically being burnt at the stake and we need to fix it. And you are in a position of where you did well enough in the end. You've got political power, you've got time, you've got protection from being fired because you're on a pension and all that. You need to just admit that and side up with the young people, literally your own children. Side up unequivocally, and join us in our assertion that against the regime that it is worse now than it's ever been in living memory. And then we have a rhetorical argument against the regime, whereas you're trying to undermine it, right? Why? You did well. You're doing great now. Side up on it, right? Why counter signal it so hard, especially when it's factually not the case? So that's boomers anyway. Once again, the stuff, like, oh, I had a car and it didn't have, zoned heating and heated seats like they have now or something. It's like, look, that's technology. And we're not talking about that, man. Like, your cars were better than the ones in the 50s as well. We know that. Just like we're talking about the ability to live, basically, in a basic fashion. But it's off the wall, the amount of the most scathing people, I'd say more even than the Trinity blue-haired girl who thinks Ireland was a sexist theocracy in 1989 or whatever. Because they come out and they'll argue with you, but the most scathing of all will be boomers. Even like right-wing nationalist populist boomers will still start to chafe and immediately get into combat mode. And that's before you've ever mentioned the word boomer. You haven't initiated this sort of battle of rhetoric here. They always do it. And it is a case of them being extremely tribal and then acting in a way going, whoa, don't be attacking us or whatever. It's like, lads, we have a big problem here, okay? And there's a gulf between our generations. And also there is a sort of one generation being burnt at the stake is sort of propping up yours a little bit, let's be real. And so we need to talk about it. Anyway, that's enough of that. I wonder, is there any more to say on that? Not really. It's so late. I wish I'd started earlier. I could do a big long stream here, like, I really could. But yeah, there's Ballymena. So just I don't want to harp on it, but like the generational question, it's an unexamined assumption. Here's one more for you, right? Because I love a good unexamined assumption and dogma. I actually haven't read John Waters's "Give Us Back the Bad Roads." Someday I'll grab a hold of it and read it, right? I think so. With that caveat said, I think I'm taking the thesis of that book do you know what? I really don't know the thesis, but I know what the interpretation of it in political circles is. And the interpretation people use, basically, it's a phrase people use now. So never mind the contents of his book, just the phrase, the idea, the narrative that's out there, the idea of give us back the bad roads. And I've spoken to this already, but if I'm correct, it's that, well, we had these like EU plastered motorways, courtesy of the EU or whatever. We got all these motorways throughout probably the 90s. They kind of really came on it online. The 80s, 90s, 2000s, thereabouts. We have like our M50s and our this and our that. And with it came the degradation of our country, the demographic replacement, the corruption of like family values, the loss of community, the rise of global business, sort of small shops close, and now we have big chains like Lidl and Aldi and all the rest of it. The kind of tragic sort of onslaught of liberal capitalism or whatever. And so we lost so much, and what we got were these good roads. And just the problem I have with that, much like with iPhones and all that, is that you go back to your Myanmar, Iran, China, Eritrea example, right? To varying extents, certainly with China, they have the best roads, high-speed rails ever, right? And they have no immigration whatsoever. They're basically a fascist hand country, right? And they have the motorways. If you've seen the motorway, and it might be one of one, I'm not sure, but in Myanmar they have that massive road in the middle of Rangoon or whatever they call it now. You know, they have these things. As I say, motorways just proliferated because of changing technology and stuff. It's not like some preserve of the most rich countries in the world. It isn't, or Western LGBT countries or whatever. It's not to do with how globalized and diverse you are, any of that. It's just much like MRI machines and iPhones and cruise control in cars as standard and these kind of things. Just technology comes along, and these things, you get one motorway and then you kind of get another one, and in different countries it proliferates at different rates. But you know, the idea that Ireland wouldn't, let's say if Ireland had held on to its more traditional values, Catholic ethos, loosely speaking, nationalism, economic protectionism to an extent, like not a autarky, but just a bit more national sort of economics, national industry and stuff, and the rest of it. And we didn't do mass immigration and stuff. Do you really still think if we had taken that fork in the road from, let's say, the 70s, two diverging paths, if we had taken that latter path, that the roads that we had in 1970 would be the roads we have now? They'd just be the same windy little roads town to town and all that. Is it really the case that a few motorways wouldn't have been built, right? It's just roads, tar, right? And diggers, basically, right? At a basic level. It's not actually quantum physics, right? Or semiconductor technology or whatever. I'm pretty sure to some extent or another, we would have still built the motorways, right? And there's a good chance that you wouldn't be paying tons of tolls on them, even though they've been paid like 6 times over already. That's maybe the only difference, if anything. You'd have more or less the motorways and you just wouldn't be paying so much tolls on them. It's just people say, oh, I definitely think we were poor, but we were happy. These kind of narratives, I don't know. It's like we were poor, but we didn't have loads of mass immigration and alienation. It's like, I actually think if we had taken a solid political path, like the likes of China or whatever, just we still had intel and we still had all that, but we did it more like Singapore. We take some migrants, but like limited and strategic and all that. And we hold on to our national values and coherency and all that. I don't see why we would be poor, so-called. I think some of the advancements that were made, some of the advancements that were made since the 80s would still have been more or less a given. You would have, for example, coffee. that's just one of the ones I gave an example of. Again, this was grok research, right? So take it with some pinch of salt, but I'd say it's probably true, right? It's common, stands to reason as well. But I just looked up what was a cup of coffee in 1990, and it was however many pounds or pence or whatever, but translated to today's money, factoring for inflation and all that, it would be €1.20 today. Now we all know a cup of coffee now is about €4. And then I looked up what a coffee shop worker, a barista, a cafe worker in 1990 versus now. For in either case, if they got like a house share and maintained a little cheap car or whatever, if either of them did that, which one of them would have more purchasing power after that? Because those are basics. You want to live somewhere, maybe have a little humble car. Those are your starting fundamentals. And then how much purchasing power do you have after those things? Or who had more purchasing power? The one now, wages to cost, or the one then? And it said the one then had more going on. They could probably house share and have a little car and then have more money in their life. And I've had loads of anecdotal reports of that from people who were actually around back then. People will say, oh, I miss the 80s and 90s. I was working in Dublin. I worked in a bar, I worked in a cafe, and I used to go on road trips, and I lived in a little house somewhere, and I wasn't too stuck, you know, I like frugal enough, but like, you know, I could do things. I could live my life. That wouldn't be possible now. I mean, house sharing in Dublin, have a car, money for the odd road trip, you know, money for stuff just from working in a coffee shop. No, you have to be like a Brazilian flat sharing with like 20 people. It's not available. Kids who used to work in car washes and stuff and make a bit of money when they're 16, 17, work in little places, that's gone now. It's all just migrants who are, again, flat sharing, 10 to a room and stuff. The lower order of the economy has been just totally wiped out, colonized. But the point on the coffee thing is that like in terms of the like we were poor but we were happy and give us back the bad roads, is that actually a lot of the things then were actually pretty good. Oh yeah, the point I wanted to make on that is a counter argument on the coffee was someone said, well, the coffee then was shite, like a spoon of like cheap Nescafe versus now you get a flat white and Java coffee or whatever. But again, 120 versus €4. I'd like to think that in terms of my general theory that yes, some things basically do get better. With the advent of the internet, ordering, you know, same day delivery and all this kind of stuff, and, you know, researching online. Obviously, in the 80s, you open a coffee shop, you might just have a jar of Nescafe. Those were the tastes of the time, you know, that was acceptable to people. That was fine. That's what people did. You open the coffee shop, you get a Burko boiler, you do your thing, right? Whereas now it would be different. You could, instead of just buying, you open your cafe, you get tables, chairs, an open and shut sign, a boiler, a dishwasher, whatever you get. Now, just one of the other things you would get opening the same coffee shop would be, yeah, I'll spend a couple of grand on a machine that, you know, does the fresh roast coffee, and I'll order the bags of coffee, and maybe that adds on 50 cents to the price or whatever. But ultimately, I think if the economy weren't so messed up, what I'm saying is basically the coffee shop from the 90s would translate it to now, much like phones got better and everything. The technology of how the coffee actually ends up getting made, and the kind of quality of it probably would have just improved a bit as well, you know. So, you know, you have things like that. Again, the idea that we were poor but we were happy, I don't know if that's quite so true, because if you had a house and someone now doesn't have a house, is the narrative of we were poor but we were happy as compared to now, how true is that? It just doesn't make sense to me. So the other example I gave was the person who said to me that my parents would eat my brother's scraps after he went to bed because they wanted to save on food. First off, 40% of parents do that in Ireland now, allegedly. And secondly, the point is that this girl's, my detractor's parents in this alleged anecdote, my retort to that was that, well, let's say your mum and dad in this anecdote were 30 years old and you were one of, I don't know, you had a couple of brothers and sisters, you were one of, say, 3. Your mother and father, if I'm to believe you, were tight on food, they had, let's say, 3 kids. Let's say they had a 3-bedroom house somewhere, maybe not even in the sticks, maybe in Dublin, Cork, Galway, in the city, whatever, some nice, decent enough area, half decent area, somewhat near their family and their friends and all that. They were a bit tight on food. Now, you fast forward to their equivalent. Let's say your dad was a bus driver, your mum did a bit of part-time work. You fast forward to that now, a 30-year-old who's working a medium-y job. He may have extra on the plate. So it's like a Dulux ad where some of the room starts disappearing around you, or the Matrix or something. You take the same equivalent, your dad's then, his equivalent now. What you do is you see his plate. It's short on food. He's scraping it from the sides. Suddenly the plate gets a little bit more dense on food. But also what happens is the 3 kids disappear out of the picture. The wife out of the picture, right? Swipes away to the left. The house disappears around him. What comes back in is a box room. He's in his mum's. So all of that value, the value of, like, you know, it kind of takes money to get a wife in a sense. Like, you know, you need to have something to get together. You know, that kind of way. Marriages don't form so well when, like, people can't get a house and family and stuff. So you swap out the value of a wife. You swap out the value of 3 kids. You swap out the value of a literal fucking entire house. And possibly a car as well. And you say, oh, well, someone now may theoretically, possibly, have a bit more food on the plate. I don't think that trade-off is great. So again, you're back to, we were poor, but we were happy. Were you poor? You had a house, and their equivalent now doesn't. So I don't know if the we're poor, but we're happy makes sense. And give us back the bad roads. Well, I think the bad roads in the 70s would have been complemented with a few motorways, no matter what happened. So I don't think, in fact, if we wanted a society that was a bit more coherent and not as predatory, global capitalism, all that stuff, if we wanted a society that was less that way, moving away from that, I don't think we would actually have to trade up a few motorways for that and go back to donkey roads. I don't think we necessarily would. And that's one of those assumptions. Buying into the premise, I don't think that's quite logical. But yeah, so I mean, if we could take a brief look at Ballymena, or you could look at Ezra Levant and Cork and all that stuff. Oh man! In short, like, Irish nationalism is, while it's doing so well. You had a demo in Limerick yesterday, I believe. There was one in RD being County Louth. Dublin, it's coming up again soon. Dublin recently, Cork. I mean, you know, Cork is a big one. But while it's quantitatively growing and surging, and it's basically becoming totally on a par, if not surpassing, the water demonstrations, water charges of 2009 and 10 and all that. It's a full-on national movement. It's thriving, right? And it's only going in the right direction in that sense. But in another sense, all of this, I mean, the inevitable Zionist infiltration stuff, Ezra Levant, people bleating on about Islam, this and that and the other. I'm no defender of Islam. Fairly ambivalent. I don't want loads of mosques getting built and Islamization and chauvinism, or kind of, what's the word, tribalism, and forcing people to have halal food. And yeah, I'm a nationalist, sure. But in perspective with everything, all the different foreign groups and entities out there, I'm not for the country being Islamized, but this idea that, like, Aisha had what age was Aisha, and this and that and the other, to me, you know, or like women in Saudi Arabia can't drive a forklift or whatever. It's like, I don't really care. Like, I don't know where that's, you know, when you hear that stuff, people who say it, I'm not saying they're guilty or they're silly or they're dumb or compromised or any of that, because you just feed into these narratives are just seeded. But to me, it's so obvious that when you see that stuff start to surge, and we've seen it so many times before in these fake populist movements, and suddenly you see Ezra Levant running around the place, and GB News, and Michael Murphy from the Telegraph, God bless him and all that, but let's be real. And he's sitting down in a podcast with, I believe it's Ian Doherty, and that podcast is funded by Rivada, right? which is basically does business with like the US deep state military complex. And Ganley, who has always had a hand in right wing stuff here, along with the likes of McGurk and them. They're sponsoring that podcast for Michael Murphy to go on and talk a spiel to Ian Doherty. And David Quinn is going on a podcast with like Yari Zeivenberger or whatever, talking about how Ireland is so anti-Israeli. And Ezra Levant is talking about how the pro-Irish anti-migration march was facing off against the pro-Hamas march in Cork. And that's your dichotomy. And innocuous flags are getting repainted in this kind of bold and sort of speculate what's the word? Spectacle in a manner of a spectacle, with era and all this stuff. I mean, am I on my own to just say there's something creeping in there? And people are obsessing over how, again, like I say, Muhammad in verse this, that said this and that, and Tommy Robinson is all over it, and there's certain figures are trying to emulate Tommy Robinson in Ireland, and Tommy Robinson is saying, "Come at me, Ayatollah, you fucking sexist," or it's just like, I don't know. Do I have to even be saying this? Like, that's the hard part, is do I have to be saying this? And also, am I the only one? Like, a lot of anons on Twitter are backing me up on this, and some very smart people. I know, and not fake anons, real ones. I know them. They are real people. But like, there's not, and because it's an uncomfortable issue, it's thorny and it's divisive and all that. But like, there's not a whole lot of real people are kind of making a point on this. I know it's divisive. It is difficult. You don't want to be pointing fingers, and I don't point fingers at people whose motives I'm not a mind reader. So like, yeah, it's just a difficult thing, but it's just so fucking obvious. It's insane how obvious it is. This phenomenon, and it's just a pity, because nationalism is, to me, so much more than that. It's such a rich idea, and for it to be reduced into this plastic Jewish Zionist political vehicle, which is designed to be antagonistic to the overall zeitgeist within Ireland, to the detriment of the nationalist movement ultimately, but to the benefit of the Zionist movement. I just find that lamentable. I've said it all before, but it's just like, if you were taking Jewish Zionist influence out of it and you just said, lads, we're doing nationalism here. This is like a hypothetical, me and Gambia trying to figure out if it's better or worse than the 80s. You come into Ireland, you don't know anything. You say, hey, I'm just reading the landscape here. I'm going to internalize some data here. You have these nationalists. They're ascendant, but they're also controversial. Most people agree with them, but there's a barrier because of state influence or whatever. You're kind of made untouchable by the state, but you want to reach out to people. You want to cross these boundaries. You want to gather a coalition, make it bigger, stronger, more effective. You need to reach the people, basically. Of course, you'd be trying to, you go, okay, Palestine, the youth has got, Palestine are all about, the youth are all about Palestine. They have a natural inclination for it, for various legitimate and other just kind of fashionable reasons, but they do. It's a long-standing tradition in Ireland as well. So it's rooted, it's natural, it makes sense, and it just is popular. It's just basically low-hanging fruit. It's easy. The whole world is pro-Palestine, against Israel now, in many, if not all, political circles. So it's a gimme. It's easy. The big gimme, if there's one thing you could reach out to the trendy TikTok youth, whatever, and say, what is the one ointment that you could give them to say, I know you've been trained to think we're racist and we're bad and we're uncool and we're like all of this and like sort of Philistine and all the rest of it, right? We're the bad guys, right? You've been given all that training, and I'm trying to reach across to you and say, we're actually not. Like, we have your interests in mind here, and it is perfectly moral, defensible, and legitimate. what's the one sort of shock therapy you could give them to almost get them to open their ears and say, okay, we have something in common, we agree on something? Well, it would be obviously the Palestine question. If you said, I don't know why you're coming at me with a Palestine flag, right? I'm for Palestine all the way, right? I'm against what's happening to them all the way. The immigration began in the late 1800s to Palestine as a concerted population replacement movement, and it rapidly escalated through the decades. Before they knew it, they had their country robbed from under them, and it was a plan all along. And in fact, the same people, in a way, are behind our replacement. And whether they are or not, it's happening the same way. And I'm against it. I think Ireland for the Irish, Palestine for the Palestinians, right? Just like the Palestinian ambassador to Ireland said. You would hack their software. They would go, oh, okay, right. And they wouldn't say, oh, well, I'm anti-Zionist. I don't like any anti-Jewish stuff, because actually that's melting away now on the left. They're getting over that distinction and just saying, listen, the two things are connected. And it is controversial. And we kind of do like Kanye's song. It's funny. It's liberating. And so we're kind of over this, like, it's scary to be anti-Semitic. We're over that. And do you know what? And then you go to them. Yeah. And the racist thing is just as fake. It's just as contrived. It's all a control mechanism. I'm not right or left. I'm just a nationalist. I'm for fairness. I'm against this corruption. I'm against this capitalist machine that's destroying us. This like global capitalism, right? Liberal capitalism. And so I'm not antagonistic to your stuff at all. And I say free Palestine all day long. Stop killing babies. That's a home run, right? And there's no counter constituency. So you get all them. You get like basically the broad swathe of the Irish population with this. And there's no real counter constituency. Like within Ireland, there's no like, oh yeah, well you get them, but you're pissing off all. There is no. It's just a total gimme. So what would interfere with that golden opportunity? If there's no constituency here? What if there was an external constituency burrowing its way into this right-wing movement, using it, crafting narratives? Well, we're just like you two, we're against the left. So basically, for them to succeed, they need to pit us against the so-called left, right? So their interest depends on that partisanship and that split, that divide around this Gaza issue. That their use for us, their use case for us, Ezra Levant taking his flight and all the rest of them, right? Their use case for us is they don't give a fuck about us, right? That's just reality. Their use for us is insofar as we can be a wedge party against all of that stuff. That's why Ezra Levant is saying, I'm here at the pro-Hamas, pro-Irish clash in Cork, right? Rubbing hands, like delighted about it, right? Delighted, thriving off that. Him thriving off that, and Irish nationalism's true interest, which is to create a unanimity, especially with the youth, by which I mean under 40 or whatever, in Ireland. Those two things are mutually exclusive. So for us to say, for example, if you said to Ezra Levant, we've actually decided that it's totally in our interests to align with these people actually on Palestine to some extent or another, and to align with these people on a lot of cultural issues. Most of them aren't really that head up about transgenders or bringing in another 500,000 migrants for gone beans. They're not in reality. So we need to actually say, we're not saying that you're for all that stuff. Some of you are, but like most of you aren't really. And most of you aren't obsessed with transgenders and all that. We can agree on Palestine. We can agree on certain things of global capitalism and all that. And maybe you can agree with us on some of the migration stuff, the identity, this, that, and the other. We can reach across the aisle a bit and cool the partisanship. And that's beneficial almost to everybody, really, because we have something, of course, to offer them as well, which is this huge ascendant populist real life movement. So let's just you're never going to successfully do it fully, but like, let's try to put that stuff away. If you said to Ezra Levant, listen, Ezra, I know you're Jewish Zionist, right? But as you've come over on this flight all the way and you want to support Ireland and blah, 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 and all this, right? given that you're so interested in how Ireland needs to be saved and all this, we have had internally, we've decided that we're going to take this approach on Palestine. Now, because you're a Canadian and we're Irish and you're here on the premise of helping us, you'll be grand with that, won't you? And so will Michael Murphy, and so will GB News, and so will David Quinn, and so will John McGurk, and so will some of these random anons online, and some of these other people, and the Air Brigade, and all this. Like, if I'm right, and others are right, that is not just for the best, but is essential really to get over this divide. We cannot fall into this tribal partisan dichotomy around the Gaza issue. It's just not, like, it's a non-starter. Your protest movements will grow. It'll feel great. Chuckagir era and all that, right? But it will hit a hard ceiling. It really will. And the split, the big divide, that big culture war will be used all day long from every side, right? From bigger actors will use that like marionettes, like a Punch and Judy show, right? And neither side will actually get what it wants ever, or anywhere close to it. So we've decided that, thanks Ezra for coming, and thanks Michael Murphy and all these people, thank you for coming. We think it would be best to be like pro-Palestine. You're still with us, right? Because you came on the premise of like save Ireland, stop immigration. So you're obviously not going to like, they would be gone like that, right? And because their interest is not served. Clearly the interest, certainly with Ezra Levant, maybe not the other guy, Ezra Levant and the rest of them, they are here for one fucking reason, and it's totally obvious. And it's not just incidental. That reason is directly contrary to the betterment of nationalism in Ireland. The betterment of nationalism in Ireland, if these talons aren't stuck into our affairs by people who have nothing to do with us really, would be to say, yes, we want to actually reduce the partisanship, reduce the gaudiness, lean into the Palestine issue and all the rest of it. Do what you got to do. Like I say, I do sincerely support Palestine big time, right? But even if you sort of were ambivalent, you'd say, yeah, but just at a purely realpolitik level, it would just make sense, wouldn't it? And if it doesn't, why? Like, what's the argument for why it doesn't? Why is it so important to be either Zionist, like these junkies waving Zionist flags in Cork, right? Or why is it so important to be stridently neutral? Why not just be pro-Palestine? All the kids are pro-Palestine. Doesn't bother us to be pro-Palestine. We don't lose anything. We can align that to our national cause very easily, rhetorically, realistically, totally fits. And you actually puncture the partisanship from both sides. Ezra Levant loses out, but also Paul Murphy and all them lose out too, who are, bear in mind, the pro-Palestinian people, the thousands of them that go out in marches, most of them are normal. They're not all like Paul Murphy. That's just a trick, right? So suddenly you get the Paul Murphys and the Mark Malones and all them too, because you're blowing their bubble, you're bursting their bubble. Yeah. To say that, I don't know what you're talking about, all these Zionist, evil, right-wing, pro-capitalist, pro-big business, cringe heads are against Palestine, they're fucking Egypts or whatever, and now both sides are in this big squabble. You totally burst that bubble by just saying, no, we're not we're not running around the place obsessing about what Muslims pray about or don't or whatever. We're not gaudy like that. We don't want them in Croke Park necessarily, but like whatever, right? There's a lot of different groups that are antagonistic to our interests, sure, but we're not running around the place obsessing over just foreigners. Like, it's really about us. It's a richer idea. We want the immigration to stop. We want remigration. We want deportation. We want Irish identity and all that stuff. But it's not what you think. It's more sophisticated than all that, right? It's not just about unvetted illegal males or whatever. That's true and all that, but like and it's an effective thing and it's a real thing or whatever, but there's more to it. It's a moral, legitimate political movement, and there's actually nothing to fear, really. In fact, you've everything to gain. You don't have a house either. Let's just be realistic on this stuff. But of course, when you have people like Levant there stirring the pot, depending on the opposite, yeah, I think you get the idea. But I just saw with Cork, I wasn't there, and I've heard reports from different people, but there was this thing from Levant. I'll find it. It was I realized that it was a little bit of a false narrative in a way, because what I had inferred from the whole thing was that the Cork demo was there, planned to happen, and then all these pro-Palestinian, crazy lefty, transgender, lunatics or whatever, right, formed a anti-Irish, pro-migration march to cause trouble for and to antagonize and oppose, counter-protest the nationalists. And I would go, oh, that's such a pain in the arse, because the right are being used by Levant and all that, but then the left are just as guilty, showing up, sort of making Palestine into this partisan wedge. Like, it takes two to tango. What a fucking disaster. That was my take. But then I only realized after the fact that actually since October 7th, whatever it was, 23, whenever that was, there's been a pro-Palestine march in Cork every week. And then I looked into it and I went, okay, when is this march and where is this march? And it turns out this march, generally speaking, is had every Saturday at 1 p.m. in Cork in Grand Parade. And it got me thinking about Levant and stuff like that. And I'm not saying Irish nationalists aren't entitled to pick a prime spot and time to march, and I'm not saying the whole thing was a setup or whatever, from everyone's point of view. But I did kind of go, well, that is not what I was led to believe, really. That's not what people were framing it as. The idea that the nationalists were being counter-protested out of nowhere by the Palestinian side, one could look at it the opposite way and say, well, if anything, the pro-Palestine march is always there at that spot at 1 p.m. And so for the Tricolour Brigade, the Mount Misery Waterford Brigade, who are chomping at the bit, just kind of going out of their way to make the Palestine thing a wedge, Irish flags versus Palestine flags and all that. If anyone were responsible for those two things coming into opposition, of course, given that the Palestine thing happens every week at that spot at that exact time, who was really doing the counter-protesting, you could argue. And bear in mind, I am a nationalist. The demo was great, right? And most people there were there for the right reason, and it was a great success. But just think about it that way. Which one was really, objectively, zooming out, to be reasonable about it, who was really doing the counter-protesting in that situation, objectively? Not that anyone owns the Grand Parade at 1 p.m., but just given that there's a lot of hours in the day, there's a lot of locations, a lot of, there's Sunday, there's Saturday, one could look at it. I could see how someone from the pro-Palestine side would be like, well, no, we're not. We do this all the time. Now, the exact flow of the day, how it happened, is interesting. I haven't been able to quite figure it out. But what I was told by someone, a nationalist who was there, told me that the idea that the screaming Antifa brigade and the pro-Palestine march were this one entity isn't quite true. And I'm open to correction on this. That it wasn't quite the case, actually, that they may have all converged. The Palestine crew are tangentially linked maybe to the Antifa crew in some ways. There's some connections, obviously. But the idea that they were all there as one big block, them, the liberal, terrible, antagonistic Palestine thing, and then the ERA brigade were on the other side, being sort of besieged by these lefties out of nowhere, unrequited or unsolicited, isn't quite true, because the Antifa crew and the Palestine crew were actually kind of separate. The Palestine people started at one place and marched up, and the Antifa were standing, screaming at the nationalists. But the point being, the Antifa crew and the Palestine crew weren't necessarily one entity at all. To an extent, the Palestine crew were just doing their weekly demo that they kind of always do. And the Antifa were different. They were there doing their screaming and shouting and being repulsive and all that in relatively smallish numbers. The Palestine thing had much bigger numbers. Like, that's what people were there for from that point of view, really, as they are every week. And so it creates a little bit of a different story. And then I look at Ezra Levant telling this tale. So I have it here. Do I share it? Doesn't matter. But oh, that's a mess. Why is it so? I'm trying to figure out how that's happening. It's a messy. Oh, I have the wrong screen shared. Okay, let's just. That's my own screen. I'm just showing you a tweet, so it doesn't really matter. But it's really not an issue. But yeah, so like, yeah, Levant, his tweets I found interesting. So a few of them, actually kind of lost it. He had one where he was in the airport. He was like, "I'm here in Cork, blah blah blah," and what he wrote was "lots to learn." And I found that just, and for like, if you underestimate people like him, then you've no business even in politics. Like, you know, the idea that someone like him is operating at just the face value level is just, you need to school up a little bit. If that's the case, he is highly, highly, highly intelligent and Machiavellian and crafty. Serious kind of political, verbal, tribal IQ going on there. There's no accidents. There's no, hey, I'm just goofing around, supporting the troops, supporting the people. It's not like that, okay? And the fact that he was in the airport going, "Oh, I'm on my way to Cork," or whatever, lots to learn. I just found lots to learn very interesting. Okay, so as he's on his flight, right, texting his buddies, going back and forth, plotting up his takeaway from the day or whatever, what it's going to be like. Do you not think he knows exactly well that, oh, well, yeah, the Palestine people do go there at that time, at that location, and the Antifa are going to show up sort of parallel because the nationalists are there and because it's Cork. And so we have Palestine flags, we have Irish flags, we have immigration versus Palestine as sort of this issue. Lots to learn. Okay, Ezra. Anyway, then he goes to the demo, schmoozes with all the nationalists, some former heroin dealers wave Zionist flags around the place as a little stunt. I mean, I was talking about this a few weeks ago. I was saying, this is where it's going, lads. And someone might have said, well, you're a bit paranoid. I don't know. Well, am I really paranoid if it plays out exactly to an increasing extent every few weeks? This project seems to be escalating. Plays out exactly like I've been saying. So Ezra Levant, with his lots to learn, arrives, schmoozes around. The whole thing goes off to perfection, whatever way you want to look at it, right? And then afterwards, he countersignals an Examiner article, and all the nationalists are saying, "Well done, Ezra. Thanks for sticking up for us and speaking the truth," or whatever. Now, he says, "Ireland's regime media are lying to their readers again, blah, blah, blah. The story in the Examiner about yesterday's dueling protests is pure disinformation. He says, there were indeed roughly 5,000 people at Grand Parade in Cork yesterday, all combined. But the Examiner deceives readers by not reporting that the pro-Irish rally was 10 to 20 times bigger than the pro-Hamas rally." Now, again, I don't mean to countersignal. I'm on the nationalist side, generally speaking, but I've been told that those numbers are off. That's bullshit. And that always happens at all events. The people who exaggerate their own numbers. I've been told it wasn't actually 10, 20 times bigger. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's not quite true. Anyway, but here's the key detail. He says the pro-Irish rally was bigger, let's say, than the pro-Hamas rally. So straight in with the rhetoric, right? Pro-Hamas, not pro-Palestine, not anti-genocide, not just pro-Hamas. This guy's a Jewish Zionist, right? I mean, do I have to say any more, right? Jewish Zionist, right-wing political operative, right? Not just I'm just a streamer, I'm just some journalist, I know, I just take videos, and it's not like that, right? So he comes along anyway, and the whole thing, he has it like sewn up perfectly, the narrative and all that, like before, during, and after. And here's the after. So the Irish rally was bigger than the pro-Hamas rally. The liberal regime Examiner are lying about my friends, the nationalists. He says, this is obviously done to undermine the real news of the day. Opposition to immigration is massive, and unlike the pro-Hamas, keep saying it, unlike the pro-Hamas counter-protest. Now again, the Palestine demo, as far as I believe, is at that location at that time every week, right? If you want to talk about the Antifa subset, they're liberal, they're pro-regime, they're bad, they're counter-signaling the nationalists, sure. But his alleged pro-Hamas, aka pro-Palestine thing, well, they are there every week at that time, at that place. So to say that, what was it? The pro-Hamas counter-protest, was it really even a counter-protest? Is it not the case that objectively, I am on the nationalist side on these, I'm a nationalist. I'm glad everyone was there. 99% of the people there were there for the right reasons. The same issues that concern me, I get it. But just let's be strategic and objective here about this and read the picture for what it could be, speculating. Just objectively, put aside the Antifa who are in the middle, sort of rubbing shoulders with the Palestine people and opposing the nationalists. Put them aside. They've always been there. The Palestine crowd specifically, he describes them as pro-Hamas. Were they really the counter-protest? Or was it just two protests happened to be in the same location? And then if you were to look at scheduling of the whole thing, the chronological nature of it, if you were to say that one protest actually counter-protested another, i.e. someone's there first and then someone else decides to show up at the same time, same place, you would say that, well, if I were a pro-Palestine person, I could say, well, I think they kind of counter-protested us in a way, really. They're coming along with Israeli flags and Ezra Levant and this and that and saying, fuck Palestine and showing up. Like, you know, that's, I'm just saying, right? That would be their perspective. So he says, unlike the pro-Hamas counter-protest, it is authentic and genuine, not arranged or funded by government NGOs. So the Hamas protest is NGO and fake and counter-protesting nationalists, and it's not contrived or being used in a Machiavellian sense for greater political powers. You could see how someone would argue that maybe it's kind of the opposite, and maybe he is actually doing an opposite land thing here, which is quite chutzpah-esque, and would fit the bill a little bit, sort of the accusation is a confession a little bit. Anyway, the exam, and again, to be clear, in case Garrod Murphy says that the nationalist demo was a big gay op and they're all shills and he's against them and he says they shouldn't have been there and done it. Be clear, I'm not saying that, right? I'm just talking about some of the vested interests that might have been playing it up a bit, right? And steering it along a certain way. That's all I'm saying. Yeah, so anyway, I'll just go through it to find more out of him. So the Examiner reports without skepticism a pro-Hamas activist's laughable claim. So he's talking about the numbers again, mine is bigger than yours, whatever, grand. And asserts without attribution that the pro-Ireland protest had fewer people. So it's all pro-Ireland, anti-immigration, pro-ERA versus pro-Hamas. Come on now, right? Given what I've been saying, am I crazy or really, right? He says, oh, they're just biased media being silly or something like that. They just don't want their readers to know how unpopular mass immigration has become. The agenda is seen in the deceptive choices of photos. Now, again, the deceptive thing and how it is, I'd say, well, are you not being deceptive by describing it as pro-Hamas? I don't think people there are going Hamas, 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 right? They're not. They're saying we're pro-Palestine, we're anti the genocide, all that. Stop killing babies, right? They would, if you asked them there, said, are you all pro-Hamas? A lot of them would have said, no, I'm not into the faction of who governs Palestine or what group or whatever. Just, they would have been anti-genocide is what they would have said. So who's being deceptive with the terminology and the details? And also that it was a counter-protest. It, strictly speaking, wasn't necessarily so. And he fucking knows that, right? But he's accusing them. And again, I'm not on the Examiner side, I'm just saying. The Examiner's pictures, he's talking about the crowd size again. The Examiner calls the pro-Irish march far right and calls that too without defining it or giving any proof. If they mean anti-Semitic, which is how that word is often used by the left, is quite the trick because I'm Jewish myself, blah, blah, blah. So he's giving cover. Like, these aren't far right and I'm a legitimate international source, so I'm your buddy, guys. Um, it talks about the pro-Irish speeches versus the pro-Hamas speeches. Again, the dichotomy in the starkest and most gaudy of terms. The Examiner accurately reports that many of the pro-Irish protesters had the Irish flag, but they choose to omit the fact that the pro-Hamas protesters did not. They had just 3. By contrast, they had dozens of Palestine flags. So all about that, and some transgender flags as well, because they're crazy liberals. If you relied on the blah, 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 it's just, lots to learn in Cork, lots to do. And this sudden rise in rhetoric across the board of Muslims this, Muslims that. Again, I'm not pro-Muslim, right? I'm not going out of my way to defend them, and I would support lots of them, right, happily, along with all the other groups that are here illegitimately, right? Especially in the last 10 years. Paper Irish, you name it. I'm for a lot of deportation. I'm certainly not for mosques and Islamic centers and all this stuff getting funded from the Gulf states and all that to be built and making all of our food, the usual. I'm against all that stuff. But the idea that it gets this inordinate focus, and we're getting back into conversations about how, you'd be thrown off a building in Palestine and stuff that's kind of not even, it's just this silly rhetoric. There was one all we're waiting for now is the anti-Iran stuff to start popping out of people's mouths, right? And I've seen a bit of it, but that's the next step. It was there's someone I'll take for example, right? Someone who is in these circles, right? In does activism in Ireland, nationalist, right? And if he's watching, he'll kind of know. He'll go, "Oh, he's talking about me" or whatever. It's not. I don't mean it in a bad way. It's just an example. And it's no different to what I said to this person at the time, face to face. It's just giving you an idea. I was talking to someone who was sort of schooled up on the so-called JQ and all that, right? To some extent. And he starts telling me about how oppressed women are in Iran and how going through the gamut of it, that they can't lash back points in the public street. And the women are all oppressed and they all get beaten up and oppressed and arrested if they don't do this or that or whatever. And they were liberal and free back in the day, but now they're oppressed and they should be free from this Muslimic tyranny, right? And the rest of it. And I just was going jovially, I was messing or whatever, but I was I think you're buying into some of the most base level Jewish propaganda there is here, Zionist propaganda, whatever. This is really simple stuff. That narrative is seeded by these people. It's one of those obvious ones. It's not that you need to love Iran or the Islamic regime or the Ayatollah, or you need to be in love with everything in Iran. But the fact that why would you be concerned about that? There's loads of countries in the world do different things to varying extents. Iran, relatively speaking, is not even that radical in their conservative religious practice and stuff. It's well known they're not. The women cursory kind of wear the veil, sort of don't. They have a lot of liberal kind of urban cosmopolitan people. It's very much actually a normal country. I would say it's probably a far more normal country than the likes of Britain or Ireland or America now, on balance. And the idea that we're losing sleep over are Muslim women free or not, and what they wear, a little sort of a veil, barely, and whether that's some sort of draconian tyranny and we're the liberal avengers to free them and all this stuff. Do you know about what women do in Myanmar or Bhutan or Papua New Guinea, or why? The question is why do you know about and have this exaggerated cartoon view of Iran and this allergic reaction to what does or doesn't go on there? Really doesn't. But that is straight from the pipeline Jewish Zionist propaganda, like for right wingers to hear. Like that is it. I was thinking about it earlier, and it's like that's on the level of that propaganda is so base. The free, like they even take the piss out of it online, like Iranian women before the revolution and all that. People joke about it now. It's so gaudy of propaganda. It's almost such a gaudy, obvious bit of Jewish Zionist American Atlanticist propaganda that it's almost on par with like Guinness makes you strong. It's like that's not even sophisticated propaganda, like something you really need to be in the know about. It's like Guinness makes you strong. It's like, well, we all know that like Guinness doesn't necessarily make you strong. It doesn't necessarily, you can't actually lift a horse if you drink Guinness. It's not real. And Guinness say that because they want to sell more Guinness. So it's not some fact. Guinness say that because it's an advert. And I think we're at the point where even Guinness expect you to know that. It's not actually true. It's just something Guinness say for Guinness's self-interest. And it's an ad. It's, I don't know, fake propaganda. It's just not real, it's fiction. And it's like well, Iran is a very bad tyranny because women there don't wear Lululemons and, do like yoga uploads to their Snapchat or whatever. They're like, they're a bit more conservative in their dress and their sort of mores and stuff. But like probably equivalent to like 1990 Ireland or something. Nothing crazy. Like they're not cutting people's heads off for showing their ankles. Nothing like that. It's actually quite a normal country. The idea that you have a big interest in what's in the Quran or what this or that or what they get to wear or drink or whatever in countries thousands of miles away or within their own households or whatever is kind of not the point. It's not it's just ridiculous. It's like all that like shite is basically Zionist propaganda to gather a constituency against Iran in the West. That's what it is. It's pretty straightforward. Same way Ezra Levant with his pro-Hamas versus pro-Irish. That's the same thing. Just the same Hasbara operation, professional political scheming, right? And maneuvering. And the fact that these people are operating at this level, and then a lot of nationalists in Ireland are just saying, yeah, thanks for agreeing with me and free Ireland and God bless Éire and all this, like not operating at that kind of level, like reading 3-4 layers behind the front page or like, seeing 3-dimensionally is just, I don't want to say upsetting, but it's like disappointing. It's like, we don't have to be hyper paranoid and we can just enjoy things, but like seriously, the fact that these people operate and they're, if you're looking at it at all, their machinations are like, even with a simple look, it's completely obvious what they're doing. With a second look, it becomes obvious that what they're doing, which is obvious, is actually kind of antagonistic and not really in our interest. They're not here for us. That's also obvious. I just wish, we could see that, but apparently not. So yeah, it's gotten late, lads. It's gotten late. So that's Ezra Levant. By the way, I'm going to be on I don't know if it's announced or whatever. UNN, it's a British channel. I think we'll be talking about some of this stuff. It's like the Tommy Robinsonification of Irish nationalism, which was hitherto very organic in itself. And it's being Tommy Robinsonified. And it's absolutely ridiculous. I just wish it wouldn't. It's coming from a lot of angles. Yeah, I see people talking about it in the chat. But so maybe while I'm here, I'll do one last bit on Ballymena. Maybe. So Burkean have a load of articles there that I never actually got around to reading. And I said maybe live I would just have a look at them. see if there's anything jumps out at me. And I might do the thing where I read the first and the last paragraph and kind of glean the middle magically, for the sake of time. But Burkean have good stuff, and they seem to know their north of Ireland well, which I have limited knowledge of. That's why I sort of I don't want to do a big thing on this, because for those, there's my nicotine thing, but for those who aren't aware, the north of Ireland is an incredibly complex political scenario. I would say, like, it's up there with like Lebanese politics, let's say, something like Syrian or Lebanese politics, in terms of how many interlocking layers of complexity there are to understand any issue at all, basically. Because if you have something like anti-mass immigration sentiment and rioting happening in the north, that all gets filtered through the prism of standard sectarianism, loyalist Protestant and versus nationalist Republican Catholic. It also gets filtered through like the British security state, MI5, or whichever one it is, 656. It gets filtered through the Republican nationalist side, which is on one hand Catholic and conservative, but on another hand, institutionally, in some sort of circles, progressive and open borders and liberal. And then apparently you have the DUP, who are also pro-migration, probably on the basis of like Gambino sort of sentiment. So it's hard to make anything of it. Like, but the Burkean seem to have. My point is that I've been up there a good bit. I love Antrim. I love the Sperrins. I love County Down, the Mournes, Newcastle, County Down. I love Ballycastle and Antrim. I've been around the block up there, up and down the place, but that's a lot different to really knowing it properly. I don't. So I thought maybe the Burkean might, basically I could read through and get some of that. So this might have been one of their first ones. UK's migrant sex crime wave reaches Ballymena. So it describes, I'm just reading this, I haven't read this before. Also, by the way, the north is just mad. Like, I'm not insulting the place, obviously. It's my country, right? But I have a morbid curiosity with places that are kind of shitholes. And not even shitholes, places that have good people and some good aspects, but they're kind of very bleak and very strange. You see a lot in North British towns and stuff. There are channels that make a whole topic of this, going around to these rundown towns, and just, the destitution and the kind of lackluster quality of it all is sort of fascinating. Same with in America, going to like Jackson, Mississippi, and parts of West Virginia and parts of New Mexico and Ohio, Cleveland, all these different places, Gary, Indiana. It's fascinating to just see a place decline for various reasons, and have a strange quality to it. And there are parts in a lot of places in the south that are like that, but there's a lot in the north as well that are very weird. They're very estate, very grid built, sort of, they feel fake. The north also has a sort of a colonial, like an American or Australian, South African quality to it. There's just something a bit unrooted about a lot of the Protestant areas, for obvious reasons. Just something a bit like a colonial outpost feel to it. And yet then it's also like a drab housing estate. But it's also got Masonic flags and all these flags and Zionist, all this weird stuff going on. It's just odd, it's a strange place. And there are a lot of those towns that are they look like they're built for like a halfway house for prisoners or drug addicts or something. It just feels fake, and it feels like English, like in English, one of these towns in an English context. It's just odd. I don't know. I find it fascinating. But Ballymena is one of these places, before I get into anything else, that is, at one point, was known as the heroin capital of Europe. It was rife with like all these Johnny Adaires. I don't even know the stuff that well, but like these loyalist people who were half in bed with the British state, burning Catholics out of it and the rest of it. who then turned to like drugs, becoming drug barons and killing each other, and it's very complicated stuff. But effectively, what I see the likes of Ballymena as, along with other places like Larne, as they have been for decades. And I'm not being sectarian here. Like, put that aside. I can very easily put that aside. I'm not overly wedded to that, but for the sake of this conversation, like, but it looks to me like a lot of these places have been run into the ground by their own paramilitaries, who are in bed with the British state and the rest of it, and they're effectively just, a lot of them are just scumbags, and they've ran their own communities into the ground. The amount of deaths that come out of Ballymena with heroin, in specific, and other towns like it, are off the wall. That these paramilitaries turned their attention away from sectarian violence somewhat post Good Friday, and just became just, I don't know, I don't want to use bad language, but like, cream crackers, like, horrible scumbag drug barons. The other thing as well is that you have had in a lot of these towns in the north, just like the south and elsewhere, is that various Roma and other type of Albanians and stuff will muscle their way into these towns, into this scum racket, and become sort of involved in that trade, kind of like nodes in that industry. Same with the human trafficking, sex trafficking. And in some senses, they would be antagonistic maybe with the loyalist kind of hegemons in the town, the former paramilitaries. They would be at odds, maybe struggling for territory or something like that, but also they would maybe work together, which is probably more likely. But the whole thing is just complete scum, complete grimness. But then on the other hand, that aside, you also have places like Ballymena, who are now like, whatever it is, 30, 40, 50% foreigner, by which I mean neither British nor Irish, Protestant, Catholic, whatever, just like foreigners. So there is genuine anti-migration, anti-Roma sentiment and all that in the town, but it's mixed in with all this underground shit as well, is what I'm saying. And it just makes it more complex than your standard Ruski or Ukdarad situation, is what I'm saying. Very complicated. I think it'll be a long time before I really have my head around it, to be honest. But anyway, so let's see if anything comes out of some of these Burkean articles. So they're just describing in a news sense what happened. See if this might just be description. So as we see, like, a lot of Roma houses got burned out of it. We saw some of them got moved to a community centre in Larne, and then a few hours later, the community centre went up in smoke. It's just like very fiery, let's say, stuff going on up there. In a way, I'd love to just spend a few weeks up there, in a journalistic capacity, talking to people, going to pubs, just hanging out there, come back after like a week or two, because then I could tell you almost fully, because I'm good at downloading years worth of local knowledge quickly. I'd love to go there and sort of learn everything. Wouldn't try not to get fucking harmed by someone. Yeah, and learn what the lay of the land is, the complexity, because I know a lot of it is there. But so anyway, with the 2021 census in the area in which the attack occurred is bleak. Over half the residents arrived in the country between 2011 and 21. Wow. The majority of residents do not speak English as their primary language, and none have any proficiency in either Irish or Ulster Scots. The majority have no recognised educational qualifications in work or menial labour, and work in menial labour while renting. The majority population is single, male and single. Residents from Ireland and Britain are almost outnumbered by Bulgarians and Romanians alone. What a nightmare. Like I say, before Romas arrive, you have this kind of bleak, sort of post-sectarian, still sectarian, obviously, kind of paramilitary infused town with a ton of heroin, and a lot of unemployment, and a lot of the rest of it. And then you just say, let's make it half gypsy now, basically. I mean, there you go. So The majority, or sorry, they're almost outnumbered by Bulgarians and Romanians alone. This data is from 4 years ago, and it is likely that the population figures are slightly worse than the data suggests. By the way, you can find all this at the Berkey and go look them up, support them, all the rest of it, obviously. Many Irish nationalists expressed their support for the riot, and some commended the targeting of migrant homes, finding common cause with the anti-migrant sentiment expressed, while others are more critical, etc., etc. That's what I'm curious about as well, is where the nationalists on it. The nationalists are clearly, by which I mean the people, not Mary Lou McDonald or something, but like the people themselves up there are against mass immigration, surely, right? So how, like, when the riots and the demonstrations sort of are happening in Ballymena, and it's a majority Protestant loyalist town, and all the spicy heads are there, obviously, at a thing like that, all the bottle throwers and stuff, all the hard men and the rest of it, like, would hard men Catholics show up as well and be like, what's the crack? How are you getting on? It's gonna, join in the occasion, we'll call it. Like, does that happen, or would it be like, no way, they like wouldn't even be anywhere near each other? I don't know how that works really. Anyway, but we know that nationalists would support the general idea of like, oh, there's too many foreigners being brought in here, all that. Just how does it play out? Evidence does suggest that UDA involvement is a possibility. TUV leader Jim McAllister claimed that individuals from outside the area came with cause. Yeah, the usual story. We always hear that. The premeditation, stockpiling, and planning all suggest that the riot was planned in advance and did not erupt as a spontaneous outburst. That's my thing as well, is that these Roma people have been there for a long time. The drugs, all the rest of it has been there. I would be curious, not to make a conspiracy theory of it. The general sentiment is true among the population, I'm sure. But the actual precipitating factor of why now, why then, why there, there's the sexual assault, I know, but probably that stuff's been going on for years as well. It's just interesting. So it probably did not erupt as a spontaneous outburst. A similar riot occurred last year in Belfast after a series of anti-migration protests, etc., etc. I'll just skip along. I don't want to dwell too long on these. The targeting of homes is a known method in the UDA arsenal, and it is too. That's the thing, burning the Romas out of their gaff. Not giving an opinion on that, right? I condemn all illegal activity and all that, but just objectively, down south you'll see blockades and whatever going on. Certainly places got quite smoky in certain occasions as well, which we all condemn. But the specific of hunting people out of their houses and burning out the house, which is like objectively a fairly radical thing to happen in any context, is a very UDA type of thing. Just make what you will of that. I'm just saying. So targeting of homes is just all I'm saying there is that just they're used to that. That's something that they have experience in. It talks about Catholics getting burnt out of their gaffs, or their homes coming under attack from loyalists. Masked men threw bricks through 5 selected homes in an attempt to intimidate Catholics out of their houses. UDA were responsible, etc. In reaction to the targeting of migrant housing. So the reason I'm reading these Burkean articles is because they clearly have lay of the land, right? In reaction to the targeting of migrant housing, one person noted that loyalist riots in the north have a much more restrained and direct character than rioting in the south does. They display a willingness to directly attack immigrants, their homes and businesses in a way that the Irish nationalist far right doesn't have. Interesting. The historical record would agree the Troubles were kickstarted by a sustained and serious period of rioting and gun battles in 1969 that escalated into the burning of Bombay Street. Loyalist mobs forced their way into Catholic housing estates and, supported by sniper fire, like British military, I assume, burned the terrace houses. British soldiers were deployed to quell the rioting, but held back as loyalist mobs set fire to Catholic housing, only deploying tear gas after the damage had already been dealt. Okay, so a bitter irony is that in Ballymena, the loyalists in the townland had protested and intimidated Catholics at their church in Harryville, which has now become a site of tension and riot between the same self-same loyalists, and the newly arrived migrants. Okay, so this is kind of doing a bit of a smug, like, which like grand, but like doing a bit of a thumb in the nose at the loyalists, at the like irony of the whole situation. Fair enough. So this taking an editorial stance here. This publication has repeatedly condemned any attempt at unity between nationalists and loyalists. The two groups are fundamentally at odds, even if they are both under the same assault for mass immigration. Any attempt at unity is sure to be abortive and will cause lasting damage to our. Okay, fair enough. I don't know about that. Fair enough, right? Let's just do one or two more quick lit reviews here, or readings. No, never mind. That's unrelated. This is a different one. Let's see the date. This was 11th of the 6th, and the other one was the 10th. Okay, so this is the next day. More to say. That's what I wanted. The uninitiated should abandon all. So the title is Ballymena. Sorry, Burkean, by the way. I hope you consider this promotion as opposed to just theft. Go to the Burkean, support them, read their articles. I mean, I don't even need to link it. You can just obviously find it. So I'll just kind of pick through it. The uninitiated should abandon all pretense of knowledge when examining northern street politics. Indeed, that's why I'm here. So has the containment zone broken down? Beyond the sweet nothings of Stormont, sectarian web of covert deals, narcopolitics, and a strategy of containment through the enabling of hooliganism. Okay, I'm garbling all that. Let's just skip on. Ballymena is a new inflection point. Ballymena comes at a time of growing pan-nationalist hegemony of Stormont and severe stress for loyalism as it appears poised to be bifurcated post-Windsor framework between moderates and ethno-nationalists. See, I'm so out of touch that half of that is kind of over my head a bit. This is an idea of it. This is how complex this stuff is. Even reading about it, it's like, what does half of that stuff mean? I don't even know. Ballymena may serve as a petri dish for how British securocrats could manage ethnic chaos on the streets of England. Very true. You know, there was, by the way, a paper by a guy called David Betts. I wonder if he is Zionist, who released a paper. He's like a London School of Economics or some university, some big shot, we'll say, on civil war in Britain, and it got loads of newspaper coverage. And it was like he's obviously regime affiliated, writing about like civil war is a real prospect. Here's how many would die every year, you know, really doing the whole thing. And he actually quoted me in it in his table. And he said, Garrod Murphy in Ireland said that immigration could lead to a break. It was actually hypocritical. I don't think I said it exactly as he said, but he quoted me on like saying that civil war is possible in the streets of Ireland, effectively related to migration. And I don't know if I quite said that. He said civil conflict. But it was weird being quoted in a paper like that because of some stream I obviously did a few years ago, or I said something in some random stream or whatever. Maybe I said it at the O'Connell Street riots live. I don't know. But what I really have said was that, by the by, was that when towns kicked off, like some Newtown, Mulkennedy, Coolock and all that, I said the day might come where many towns across Ireland would kick off. And basically, if enough of them did at the same time and it caught on as a bit of a contagion and the situation had gotten so bad, let's say 20s, 27 or whatever, it had gotten so bad that so many dozens of towns went off. And basically, I was saying that the bandwidth of the state would effectively hit its limit. And the Gardaí, there aren't enough guards, there aren't enough monitors, there aren't enough any of that to be able to sort of control it. And at a certain point, it just totally gets out of hand and it becomes like civil conflict. Where it escalates, it goes to negative places. It goes back and forth. Think of what Talbot Street would look like, the internecine chaos. Think of towns and villages and everything all over the country. And all sorts of stuff would be going on. And that could happen. And my point at the time was to say, listen, I'm not advocating for that. I'm not delighting at that. I'm saying that that's where this is heading. And what the Irish state need to do is just listen to the people. Stop bringing these people in at night under police protection and battering people, pepper spraying people, ignoring 99% votes against, ignoring the whole country being against it. Like, stop doing that and it'll be grand, right? But eventually this is going to cause chaos, complete civil breakdown. And it just is what it is. It will. And anyway, he's quoting me, among others, in different contexts, talking about this stuff. And some more schizo people would say, well, that is part of the agenda. I don't know whether they are or they aren't. That's next level, let's say, stuff. But let's just take it for what it is. The state, they are preparing for / intentionally creating a situation, I don't know, a situation of like wild sort of violence and vandalism and chaos and breakdown in these countries, Britain and Ireland. And I'm just basically agreeing with what they're saying here, that I can totally see Ballymena being a test case, that they either stoke a bit or they just, it happens naturally, but they kind of monitor it very closely and use it as a test bed for this kind of stuff, because the North has all this infrastructure for quelling this stuff, and it's, you know, it's at the cutting edge globally of sort of a police state that deals with or weaponizes or whatever this sort of sectarian breakdown. So it is fascinating. Anyway, Ballymena may serve as a petri dish for how British securocrats could manage ethnic chaos on the streets of England. To begin evaluating militant loyalism, please note that the UDA, UVF, and various splinters do not operate totally independently of the support of the British government. I'm just going to keep reading this word for word here because it's interesting. And bear in mind, we have Drew Harris as the head of the police down here. His father was killed supposedly by the Ra. He's a northerner, Drew Harris, and the rest of it, like, it's all bound up, the two countries and the country so-called in between, the north of Ireland. Anyway, British intelligence historically used a combination of overt and covert strategies to manage loyalist militants in the 6 counties, whether direct collusion or selective enforcement of criminal racketeering. I'll try not to skip too much, but I want to just move on as well. Involvement in drug dealing, extortion, etc. You know, playing games with all this stuff, like shady Fed gay ops, which is like absolutely rife in Northern Ireland. Many loyalist street gangs are allowed to operate within boundaries so long as they target Republicans or stay within certain limits. In tandem with these agreements of community funding, prisoner release, and influence in post-Good Friday Agreement, creates incentives to stay peaceful. So basically, the Stormont London state has a sort of a patronage racket with loyalist sectarian paramilitaries or whatever, these various groups, and so long as they keep the money flowing and the sort of power arrangement in place, everyone's dandy, right? When loyalist gangs riot, they don't just cause damage, they show they still run their streets, a feature that senior members use as a bargaining chip with London's overseers when it comes to the drug trade, prestige or grant. I just can't stop reading it, it's too good. After Ballymena, loyalist hardliners will see anti-migrant violence as a new opportunity to assert power and regain community relevance. Previously quasi-dormant paramilitary structures could be reactivated for nativist purposes under the guise of protecting Protestant communities from perceived migrant threats. Now, this is all very interesting. The one thing I not disagree on, but let's say sort of, is that, and I know whoever wrote this is aware of this, obviously, but I just feel like it warrants pointing out, is that you can't discount the fact that, and they have mentioned it, that loyalist areas, not the paramilitary groups or the leaders or whatever, but just people who are loyalists living there, they do have half their town or whatever is Roma gypsies, and that is whether that's in the context of Southern, like Irish Catholics in, I don't know, Waterford or anywhere, any street or area, that's going to cause legitimate, justifiable outrage among people, right? And to put any sectarian bias I would have aside, is that while we all condemn violence and illegal activity, the legitimate outrage, though, of those people is inevitable and, like, natural, let's say. They are, like, even if you're sort of against the London secure state and the loyalist shenanigans and all that, at the end of the day, the loyalists up there are people, and they have the same issue with this as we all do. And they're suffering pretty heavily underneath all these gay ops and the bullshit. And they do just want it to stop so that they can take their kids to the park and whatever else as well. So in between all this nonsense, this sort of statecraft and bullshit and subversion and sectarianism is just people in that scenario. Anyway, all this is bad news. While no Irish persons should harbour any doubts about the fact that a loyalist community cannot and will not ever be our allies. Okay, we get that. That being said, there is a darker underbelly to these disturbances from the perspective of the British intel machine, informant networks and control mechanisms. They may have degraded in the post-Troubles era, leaving MI5 and PSNI less able to steer and disrupt spontaneous upsurge. If militant actors feel emboldened or perceive a political vacuum, the post-GFA containment model may collapse or become reactive rather than proactive. That's very interesting. That could get quite chaotic. To be seen... Ballymena suggests that these containment strategies may no longer be effective, especially among younger post-ceasefire loyalists who may reject the deals made by older leadership figures. Loyalist heavies are normally given certain latitude in harassment of Catholics as part of the post-bellum security arrangements, with attacks on migrants maybe an extension of this informality. Hardly breaking news, but the rioting itself demonstrates the loyalist groups can still mobilize quickly and enforce dominance in their streets and exploit community fears. This revives a paramilitary logic that was meant to be dismantled. Okay, I'm going to cut to the end and cut to the chase, we'll say. I mean, not to lose any of the other stuff. You can go back and read it. Controlling loyalist gangs in a prospective united Ireland isn't just a policing problem. It's a full-spectrum statecraft challenge, unthinkable for sedentary Irish security and intelligence infrastructure. Liberalism promises rights, individual choice, and neutrality. Loyalist groups believe in community authority, cultural supremacy, and the preservation of tradition, and no amount of diversity training or Garda reform will close this chasm. So yeah, it's a fucking tinderbox is what it is. And it's so messy and so all over the place. But our eyes will be glued to it, I suppose. And there's one more here. From bonfires to bedfellows, Lasser Darragh lifts lid on Antifa's loyalist romance. I'm just going to do the trick here where I read the very start and the very end because I'm tired. Lasser Darragh. So this is one of these like Marxist, pro-leftist kind of like radical groups, kind of like Seru or whatever. One of these. I don't really know who they are, but I'm gathering that much. So they met and they like basically like rad Antifa type, so-called Irish flag people. Do you know what I mean? If we can put it in such silly terms. The sort of Marxist fringe of like Sinn Féin, Rise and all that. I'm open to correction. So they met in Derry to discuss the rise of anti-immigration sentiment in Ireland. Video, I saw this going around a few weeks ago. Video of it went around. It flew largely under the radar until recently when a few comments from the video drew attention. So they're talking about how can Ireland be full when we haven't recovered from famine, population, post-famine. And they're going on with all this kind of stuff. So they're basically pro-migration, like silly people, we'll say. I'm losing my sort of articulateness here if I ever had it. You get the idea. So basically they're saying here it was all the usual bullshit, Antifa bullshit. And then they got to more and more. So what's the juicy bit here? The revelation must surely come as a surprise to most. It raises several obvious questions. Who are the members of this group? Who pays them to try and overcome the far right? Why are they so bad at it? Who are they targeting? The far right in general, or the anti-immigration protest movement in Ireland in particular? Are they targeting people in the north? The group in question, whoever they may be, appears to be professional researchers. I mean, all these like far right observatories in Ireland, all these kind of groups, and same with Hope Not Hate in England. I mean, this is all straight up Fed stuff. I mean, let's just be real. The connection between like Gardaí, British MI5 or whatever they are, and these sort of spy research groups or whatever is completely like barely existent. The divide between these things. Anyway, back to where it was. They appear to be professional researchers, likely associated with academia or an NGO. I'll go on. It would be of great value if the identity and purpose of these researchers could be uncovered, as right now there is a situation where it appears to be public funding is being spent to manipulate online political debate. Okay, so the usual story with that stuff. The second part, which drew people's attention, was the final suggestion of an event in discussion on how the left should proceed. It was bizarrely about cooperating with unionists in order to combat racism. Being well aware of the volume of abuse that has been meted out to the anti-immigration movement for even slight associations with anything British, this suggestion of cooperation with unionists to combat nationalists elicited not a whit of condemnation. That is interesting. So they're always saying basically the so-called far right in Ireland are like British plants, or they're, Brits or something, right? And it's always bullshit. It's just something they just throw out there as a bit of rhetoric. Okay, so that's hypocritical, fair enough. But what else? So there exists undeniably a proposal to form some kind of tripartite alliance between Reds, unionists, and migrants, all on the basis of their shared opposition to nationalism. It is very much necessary to point out. So if that's the case, what about all the unionists who are rioting in Ballymena? How does all that come into it? Anyway, it's very much necessary to point out that unionist areas across the north, beginning with Ballymena but spreading out to Larne, Portadown and Coleraine, have been rioting for days as a result of sexual assaults by migrants against teenage girls. Riot and disorder aside, many other sites across the north saw peaceful protesting in solidarity with the people of Ballymena. Okay. And so the proposed tripartite alliance against nationalism would seem to have gotten off on a bad foot, as the unionist community they might have engaged with on the anti-racist basis are now conducting actual pogroms against migrants, and people are marking their houses with symbols of the UK and the Orange Order to avoid having their home burnt out. It might also be noted that this was an initiative agreed upon by multiple speakers at the table, not off-the-cuff ramblings of a lone madman. Interesting. Okay, so let's see the conclusion, because we're wrapping it up here. Last 3 paragraphs, so we'll see what comes out of it. They claim that by adopting an issue and making it theirs, take for instance housing, that they can become the de facto go-to people on the issue. If someone is known for getting things done and solving problems, then people in that community will flock to that person for solutions regardless of the ideology. This action would deny the right the ability to make gains by sucking the oxygen out of the proverbial room. They are seriously concerned that if people on the right were to do this, it would essentially hamstring them, and are glad that by and large it hasn't happened yet. Okay, so I think that's it. Basically, a funny, strange alliance between these groups that runs completely contrary to the recent events in the likes of Ballymena. Okay, so suffice it to say, between all those different articles, a lot of enlightenment had there. But my takeaway would be that it's a big, huge shit show where you have the sectarianism, you have the Fed activity from like kind of the Brits or Stormont or whatever, or like between the British security state and the paramilitaries, but that's breaking down. But meanwhile, the Republicans are trying to ally with unionists and migrants against nationalists, and then nationalists in the South are being accused by Republicans, let's say, of being British operatives, and then we're, and meanwhile, like houses are getting burnt out, and the PSNI are there, and who knows what's going on. Is that some sort of test bed for civil unrest in England? Meanwhile, I'm being quoted in a paper sort of prophesizing this as well from years ago. I don't know. It's all to play for. Who knows what's going to happen, but it's not going anywhere good in any way. It would be great if they would just stop doing this to us, whether we're loyalists or Republicans or nationalists or English or whatever. Again, I'm not trying to say let's all unite and put aside that's it's too complicated for all that necessarily, but just it's the same takeaway. Could they just stop putting loads of Roma gypsies into these towns? I mean, is that sort of, and everyone knows that I think not only are they not bad, but they're the best people, the creme de la creme of the world, right? And they would be excellent staff in a jeweler's. But like, you know, it just comes back to the same thing. It's like what like not to be schizo about it, but it is like, you know, they are trying. Like if you were trying to create absolute hell and bedlam, this is exactly what you would be doing. So a territory, an area that only sort of got over centuries long sectarian strife, right? It still exists, the tension and the rest of it. But like in terms of just bombings and the rest of it, a place that only got over that a few decades ago, and then the first thing you do is fill a town up half with Roma gypsies. Cool. What's going on? What is this? What sort of hell do they want us in here? We're just in it. We're just living in it. That's how it is. And apparently we're powerless to, we can't talk about, we can't just come up, knock on the door and say, any chance we can just not do this? We just have a normal country like China or Iran or somewhere like that. Even Israel, right? God forbid. You know, they have a fertility rate of like 3 people per person. There is an ascendant sort of jubilant atmosphere over there. I'm not saying we want to be like Jewish Zionists or whatever, but you get what I mean. Any of these countries that are out there for themselves, running the place coherently for the better from their point of view, like why can't we do that? Israel's a bad example because they're kind of killing lots of people. You know what I'm saying? Let's take China as the better example. Why can't we just have a government like that? That's just, there's a little bit of corruption, there's a little bit of this and a bit of that, but for the most part, at the deep level, at the fundamental level, they're just trying to make the place better and keep it stable and incrementally make it a bit more pleasant to live in. Is that so hard? Is that too much to ask for? I don't know. I mean, the north of Ireland would be a perfect case of like the opposite of like your China or a normal society, Saudi Arabia or one of the Gulf countries or whatever that's thriving away in Singapore, you know, somewhere like that, doing its own thing sensibly. The north would be like with these kind of grim estates, the security state, the existing sectarianism, this stuff, the bad weather, just utterly grim and disturbing how hostile a ruling class, whoever they are, whatever they are, could be towards just millions of ultimately ordinary people, loyalist or otherwise. It's very disturbing, and we all live with it. We all see it. But you're watching here, you're familiar with it. But even normal people, everyone senses it. This nightmare. Quite the pity. Anyway, on a positive note, I don't actually have a positive note, but if I did, I'd tell you. So anyway, yeah, I'm going to wrap it up there. So late. Handful of super chats there. So, Concavar McNessa. Am I pronouncing that first? Everything is permissible, but nothing is possible. Indeed. Thank you. Armchair Limerick Nationals 5 super sticker. And then very nicely, thank you. Happy Father's Day, Gerald. You know what? I enjoyed it. I didn't do anything special, but just the little card and stuff. It's nice. It's great. It feels good, you know. So happy Father's Day to any of you dads out there and any of you who want to maybe become dad someday. Go for it. Find someone, have some kids. It's wonderful. So anyway, happy Father's Day to everybody. Thank you for joining me and keeping me company tonight. Ihawa. See you.